So let's go ahead and get started. So again, hi to everybody that has joined. Hi to Facebook.
Hey, Facebook. Hey, everybody.
Well, we gotta keep them in mind. Um, so today's panel, it was supposed to be a panel. We'll get into that. Today's conversation is titled "Peeling Back Shame: A Sex Positive Conversation Between Black Women." As many of you may or may not know, this month is Women's History Month. And we wanted to kind of get into some of the roots of issues that Black women are having in our community. And so we wanted to start with sex. So I will let our fellow panelist introduce herself, Miss Shayna Moore. If you want to go ahead.
Yes. Hey, everyone. Nice of y'all to join us. Come on, pop in, get comfortable, because we're about to talk about sex, y'all. I am Shayna Moore, and I currently am a independent blogger. My blog name is More or Less, and basically the foundation for More or Less is where I just talk about my own experiences with childhood trauma, sexual trauma, different types of trauma, and how I'm working through coping and healing, because we all know it's not an easy task, but somebody got to do it.
Mm-hmm. So tell them a little bit about what you do professionally, because that
Oh,
is.
professionally, I am a housing navigator / development officer for the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development. I work under a grant initiated by Governor Hogan back in 2017 called the New Future Subsidy Program, where we assist survivors of intimate partner violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, as well as youth aging out of foster care who have suffered abuse or neglect. We help them find sustainable housing for at least a 12-month period. And we assist them during that 12-month period in, just trying to make sure they reach a state of self-sufficiency where afterwards, hopefully, they'll be able to navigate this life on their own.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's important, and the reason why I asked about your work at DHCD, it's important to talk about DHCD just because of its connection to the founding of Oceans Garden. So before just to give my background, my name is Makaya Purnell. I'm the founder of Oceans Garden, and I also am the Office on Violence Against Women Campus Program grant coordinator at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. So before I stepped into higher education, I also worked for DHCD, and it was the New Futures program that really opened my eyes to survivors and the needs that were going unmet here, and how a lot of times the services that are offered or that are available aren't really culturally competent, or they're missing the mark when it comes to Black women. So Oceans Garden, we have pushed into this direction of really focusing on violence against Black women, not only direct violence in terms of physical and sexual assault, those sorts of things, but also, more structural and institutional violence and societal violence. And so when we talk about structural violence and things like that, we have to get to the root.
Yes.
So we started thinking about this concept of sex positivity, and how when we are not sex positive, you create this culture like rape culture and other types of stereotypes that lead to violence against Black women that shows up in a number of ways. So it only made sense to have this conversation today about sex positivity and to call it peeling back shame, because essentially, for the most part, we shame women for being sexual beings. So let's get started, Shayna.
All right.
Also, before we get started, we were supposed
Yes.
to be joined by Vanessa Greffard. She is the VP of Planned Parenthood's Education and Outreach. She had an emergency, so she will not be able to join us today. So we send her well wishes and a speedy recovery.
Yes.
But let's get started. So this concept of sex positivity, in your own words, what does that mean for you? What does that look like?
To me, sex positivity, immediately the first thing I think of is just like removing the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when it comes to sex positivity, as Black women, we're not allowed to be sexually positive or open about our sexuality because labels put on us, oh, she fast, or just like a insinuation of promiscuity on us. So I think of sex positivity, I think of freedom and comfortability in one's own sexual identity or sexuality.
Yep. And it's the same for me too. I think essentially the best way for me to sum it up when people ask is thinking that we all have different sexual experiences, right? We all have different sexual experiences. And who am I to tell you that your experience is bad or it's
Right.
not the proper way, none of us can really do that. And so essentially sex positivity is the idea that as long as sex is consensual, you have two consenting adults, it's healthy and you are an informed adult, then it can't be wrong. So
Right.
let's talk about that. This, when we're saying freedom and we're talking about sex, respecting other people's sexual experiences, I think it's safe to say that we have to talk about how we got to this point. Who says that we're not sex positive? What does not being sex positive look like? Uh,
Right.
and that would be getting into sex negativity. So the complete opposite of what we're talking about. How did we get here? What creates this culture of having negative views towards sex?
I think initially, I think of labels,
Mhm.
because growing up, what did we first think of? Oh, if he or she has a whole lot of sex, immediately they're a hoe, or that the thought or things like that. So it's like, why do we label somebody who's openly engaging in sexual activity that they are finding consensual and healthy? And now it's like, I think that we make sex such a taboo subject that when we hear about somebody doing it, it's just like, oh my God,
Mhm.
like they're having sex. Like,
No,
like,
I know. Just hearing it, like I'm sure people probably looked at this conversation and was like, "What are they going to be talking about? Is this going to be kinky?" Like
right, like they about to be nasty up here. Like,
I think that's what people think when they hear sex. Like it has such a negative connotation, and for me, I think that's created. I think a lot of things for me start with us being a very religious community. The Black
mm,
church is a very central forum for Black people, and it's always been central to who we are as a major institution in our community. And so when you have such a revered institution that teaches sex in a way, um, I'm not going to say that it can't ever be for pleasure in religious texts, but it's it's there's an appropriate place for it, an appropriate time. And for
right.
religious folks, the appropriate place and time is when you're married, it's
Yep.
monogamous,
Mm,
it's heterosexual. There really is no space for those who are in the margin outside of heterosexual and married. So
mhm.
teach children that they shouldn't be having sex, because if you have sex, then what's going to happen? You might get pregnant, or you might get a disease, or just all these negative messages that we're sending. And so for me, religion is a central part to where the shame comes from, right?
Indeed. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you have sex before marriage, it's considered a sin.
Mm-hmm.
And if you perhaps get pregnant out of that relationship and you're not married, it's a sin.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot of, like you said, shame that comes with it. And along with religion, how much sex education are children getting
Yeah.
nowadays? I admit, me growing up, if you ask me if I learned about sex in school, I'm like, no, I learned about the DARE program. This tiger running around telling me don't do drugs.
Exactly.
But as a Black female, I was also taught, just don't get pregnant. Don't have sex and don't get pregnant.
Yep.
So it kind of was like, what else am I supposed to do with that? Or like, growing up, like, my body's a distraction in school. Don't wear this or don't do that. So like, I feel like that even produced a lot of shame
Yep.
for not just myself, but other young women growing up through school.
Yep. It definitely does. And that's really, I know during our last webinar, we had one, denormalizing and deconstructing unhealthy relationships, and we
Mm,
touched a little bit on religion, and that's definitely a conversation that we need to plan. Is not just sex in the religious communities, but also how they are responding to gender-based violence. That's
yes.
a separate conversation that we should definitely have next. But as I said, being a religious society, a religious country, it only makes sense that these ideas, even for people who don't consider themselves to be religious, right?
Mm,
So growing up, I love to say that I my grandparents were religious, but my parents did not raise us to be religious. We
right.
weren't made to go to church or those sorts of things. So I would always say that I was not a religious person, but I still had these ideas that were influenced by religious texts, right? Like
Right.
people still made me feel like my virginity was like my most prized possession. And
Mm.
it probably wasn't until college that I started to think like, I'm smart. You know what I mean? Like you don't talk about me being smart. You think that women should be like me because I was a virgin at the time.
Mhm.
People love to say that. it's like, oh, girls should be like you. And when you ask why, it has nothing to do with you wanting
Nope.
better, you being, you know, I guess being athletic, or you being educated, or you having these interests. It was about you being a virgin. Why? Because we know that women are only here, for most people, we're only here to satisfy their needs.
Right.
And
And
so
they
that's
like made it
why,
like a sense of like some type of like purity, like, oh,
yeah,
she's untouched, she's clean. And we held on to that so tightly, like we made like our virginity this prized possession.
yes.
And it
It
was just like it
was
has to be done this way and that way, not knowing anything about sex, just thinking that the first time is going to be something magical. And it
Mhm.
wasn't.
But listen, but even that, like even saying losing your virginity, like it just sounds
Right.
bad. It sounds like something you don't want to do. And it's emotional. Like a lot of us feel like attached to virginity. You think about it too much. It's like, am I doing it with the wrong person? And you're right. You do
Hmm.
overthink it, and then it happens. And it's like, first of all, y'all have this idea that we're supposed to wait until marriage. So the assumption that these people who have never had sex on their honeymoon have sex and they instantly understand how it works, they instantly know each other's bodies and what pleasures, pleasure points the other person has. That's not how it works.
At
And
all.
so, again, we have this culture that sex is bad. You're not teaching children these things. And so when they do have sexual experiences, they can't even tell the other person what they like. They don't even know what they like for
They,
themselves, right? They haven't
they don't
even
even know what they like.
themselves. So what happens when we don't teach kids properly? What happens, what effects does that have?
Unfortunately, they learn negatively from other sources,
Hmm.
and it's like they go through this experimental phase where they think they're doing things right, or they're relying on the other person to kind of guide them through, because the other person might be somebody who's more experienced. And sometimes it could lead to that individual having a bad experience,
Hmm.
'cause like you said, the framework of talking about virginity, oh, you're losing it, and that person who you gave it to now is saying, I took your virginity, like,
Hmm.
and it made it seem like, like a piece of property was taken from you.
Yes.
So I think when you don't educate children, they don't know what they're doing. And that even kind of leads me into like healthy conversations about masturbation,
Hmm.
like thinking that it's not something that's healthy, even though it's something that is humanistic. And I'm not saying all people do it, but at some point in time, when children start growing up, they're going to start exploring their own bodies
Hmm.
and wondering, like, oh, well, what does this do? Or I'm getting these feelings or these urges. But what space do they have to talk about those things unless they're being told, well, you don't do that, or you don't do this,
Hmm.
because it's not right.
Yep. And you're right, they do. When we and I guess I say when we don't teach it properly. And what I mean is that when we don't have sex positive education for
Hmm.
children, she's right, they do go and they get it in other places, whether that's through risky behavior.
Hmm.
They may get it from the media. We know how a lot of male entertainers speak of women and their bodies and sex. So they may be getting
Indeed.
it from media, getting it from their friends who don't know any better than they do. Don't know any better than they do. And think about how we were as teenagers. You know what I mean? And I say all the time that I feel like people talk about sex as if they're still in their teenage body. They still don't know.
They
And it's
still don't.
like it just dawned on me. A lot of us still sound like we are in our teenage bodies. It's still, oh, there are some people who still refer to virginity as a B card, as if it's something to take, right?
Yeah, like it's a pass or something.
Yeah, but there are a lot of grown adults who still speak this way, who, oh, she loose, or she
Hmm.
said earlier, some of the names that we attach to women who are sexual. Uh and sometimes you don't even have to be sexually active to get those names. If they see you dressing a certain way, then
Hmm.
you're already a hoe or something like that. So I definitely agree with the again, when we don't teach it, when we don't teach sex positivity, they do go and they get it in the wrong places. So Vanessa,
Right.
who was supposed to be joining us today, is the VP of Education and Outreach at Planned Parenthood. She also created what she calls Badge Esteem. And so in both of her roles, she talks a lot about sex education, especially as it relates to the Black community and Black girls.
Yes.
teaching and creating spaces where we can be open to have these conversations. As you said, masturbation, whether all sorts of things. I think STDs, pregnancy,
Hmm.
all sorts of things that she's teaching in both of her roles. And I think that's very important. And another resource that I recently learned about was sex positive families. If anybody who's watching is on this live, or anyone who is a parent, I strongly, even if you're not a parent, because I'm not a parent, but I recently started following them, Sex Positive Families. They have a lot of resources and guides for parents on how to start the conversation.
Yes.
Break it down very well. I think you can get a lot of information from their website, but they have books as well. But breaking down every topic that you can think of when it comes to sex and how to have these conversation starters.
Hmm.
So what happens if your child asks a question that you may think they're not ready to hear, right? Then you may think like, oh, they're too young for me to have this sex conversation, but really they're not. So that brings me into our next point.
Yes.
When it comes to children, they are exposed to sexual conversation and things like consent since birth, right? It's as simple as saying, hey, can I take your picture? Hey, can I give you a hug? A lot of
Right.
parents get so upset when a child is like, no, but that is consent that we're teaching them. So when you teach them that they have to be open to giving a stranger a hug, or
Hmm.
can they take your picture, simply asking that is the groundwork, the framework for
Consent.
having, knowing what consent is, and
Right.
engaging in consensual activity when they get older. So what are your thoughts about that, like in terms of how we can start to introduce these conversations, or even thinking about yourself, what would you have liked to have seen as a child or growing up into adulthood? How would you have preferred for that to look, to be
Um,
more informed about sex?
I would say most definitely it growing up, I would say from elementary to high school, I can't say they talked about sex education at all. I didn't have a sex education class until college.
Hmm.
And even that class was more or less just about anatomy. And I'm like, well, we all know what we got by now, but I think it would have been better had we been taught, the changes that's going to go along with our bodies. Cause, I know a lot of us were experiencing, as women, we were experiencing our first menstruals
Hmm.
and, you know, being introduced to sanitary items such as, pads, but I never even the stigma against that. Oh, if you use tampons, you're immediately no longer a virgin,
Yeah.
and just like I played sports in high school. So it was like, I had to start using tampons, but in that framework, I was still a virgin, but it was just like, oh my God, if people see me using a tampon, what are they going to say? What are they going to think about me? Oh, if I use a super, am I a hoe now? Like, cause I'm using super other than like a regular. So I think even then we should have had that conversations, even if it's, awkward, separate the girls and separate the guys in different classrooms during health or something like that and start having those conversations and then cross it, because the more knowledge as a young adult about sex, the more you're able to make those decisions on whether or not you want to move forward. You're able to stand firm in, am I ready to engage in sex yet? Is this the right partner? Instead of the peer pressure that some people often have to deal with.
Yeah. And that's what I love about the page Sex Positive Families, because
Hmm.
she uses her own experience as a parent, and she talks about, questions that her children have asked her, and whether they're boy identified or girl identified children, she talks about what her children have asked and how she's responded. And again, this is all
Hmm.
available either on her website or in this book. But when I think about myself, my parents never had sexual conversations with me.
Right.
Well, it was never something that I think my mom tried. She would always say, if you feel like you want to have sex, just let me know and I'll put you on birth control. Right. But that's not enough. That wasn't enough.
Right. It's like,
Not
well, what do I do
enough.
next?
Right. What I mean, and I think that a lot of times uh it's because they don't really know how to have the conversation. They don't know what that looks like. They don't want to say too
Hmm.
much. Sometimes they may think, if I say too much, then they're going to do it. And maybe I don't want them to do it. And that's not always true. that they're going to go and have sex just because you have this conversation, but it's just best for them to be prepared and to know that way they're not going and getting it from the wrong place and being misinformed. So for me, even though we didn't have the conversation, my parents didn't have the conversation with us. I was in an after school program called Just for Girls, which is
Okay.
around, still very influential into who I am today. But Just for Girls was mostly abstinence based, right?
Mm,
So it was teaching us to wait until marriage. And, at that time, and I still do, I still respect abstinence because that is also a piece of sex positivity, respecting
right.
choice. So I still respect the choice of people who want to wait until marriage or who are just waiting, period, for their person.
Yeah.
But when we teach it in a way that's abstinence only, is where we have concerns. And statistically, the data does show that teaching abstinence only is not effective because you do have those children who are in these courses or who are in these programs, but they're having sex. But if you're only teaching abstinence only, you're missing them. It's a lot of information that they're not
Exactly.
getting. And again, it goes back to just this culture of being misinformed and getting that information from the wrong places. So you made a really good point.
I
Uh,
mean, I could say from my experience, my parents, we didn't really have conversations about sex, but I think it was comfortability on both our ends. Cause I used to think to my, like, I'm an only girl and I have three brothers. So as an only girl, I was like, can't have sex because I'm daddy's little girl. And if I do it, it's over. Like, like, so, but then like, as I started getting older, I was just like, I'm going to ask, so like, I never, even the first time I asked my mother about masturbation, at first you could see she kind of looked at me like, okay. But then we started talking, and then I was just looking like, oh, well, she's open about talking about stuff. Well, I'm gonna start telling her about some things about me too. Like,
hey, how old would you say you were when you had this conversation?
um, maybe like 15, 16, and
Okay.
everything. And and even in that conversation, I learned some things about my mom.
Hmm.
And I think at that point I had to remember, like, my mom was a person before she was my mom.
Yes.
So it's like that was even like a learning moment for me, like, oh well, you've had some experiences too. I can learn from you.
Yes.
Because in my mind, I thought my first time was going to be like Monica and Quincy, like loving basketball. Maxwell was going to be in the background and everything, and, and
Yeah.
they didn't mention the pain, nothing like that. So I was misguided. So yeah, we need education.
But yes, my mom totally did start to have. She did tell me about her experiences, but again,
Right.
the way that other people told me about their experiences did not sound good. And they were telling me about their experiences with other people. They never had conversations with me about masturbation. That is still to this day, a lot of people think that that is so weird. I even hear women say, "Why do I need to masturbate if I got a man?" Sis.
It's how you know what you like. Like,
Right, but that's what this is all about, is being comfortable with exploring your body and knowing what it is
mhm.
that you want. If you are not able to understand your own body and again what your pleasure points are, you really cannot help someone else. And that goes back to what we were saying. There's
Mhm.
an assumption that once you have sex for the first time, you automatically know what to do. And when you have a partner, even if you're not a virgin, even if you have a new partner, you still have
Yep.
to teach that person about what it is that you like and what you don't like, and vice versa. You know what I mean? Like you can't just make the
Mhm.
assumption that they will know and that's what you like. No, we all have different bodies, and so what worked for someone may not work for you.
Exactly.
So
Because we all don't like the same things.
no.
And I think that's a belief that some people have about the other on the other gender, or whoever they're sleeping with. That, like, well, I've had this experience with this person, so
Hmm.
I think you'll like the same thing. And it's not the case.
Hmm.
And as a people, we have to also start being comfortable in advocating for ourselves and saying, well, this is what I like, this is what I don't like.
Hmm.
Like, even though that might be your thing, it's not mine. And
Yeah.
be comfortable in saying that.
Yeah.
Because like you said, sex is supposed to be healthy and consensual. We both are on the same page.
Yeah. And even you just made a when you said whoever you're having sex with reminded me that even again, not only with the issue of teaching abstinence only, but a lot of our sex ed classes are heteronormative, right?
Yes.
Consider the experiences of those who are on the spectrum, who
Hmm.
identify with an identity that's not heterosexual. What information do we have for them?
Exactly. How are they supposed to prepare for safe sex and what's consensual for them? Because that is certainly what it is. I mean, we now have, I could say maybe like even middle school aged children like figuring out their sexual identity and realizing, okay, well, I'm more attracted to this, or they may not even be sexually attracted for people who are asexual.
Yes, yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that is a lot of times people leave out asexuality when they think of
Hmm.
positivity. It's a lot of times framed specifically for those who are having sex and who do have sexual attraction, but
Right.
we do need to make space for those who have no sexual attraction because again, that is their experience. It's valid. It needs to be respected, and we shouldn't be forcing sex on to people. That's not what this is. But
Exactly.
it's a basic understanding that we all have different sexual experiences, and that's okay. And one is not better than the other, whether you're having sex or you're not. It's just respecting people where they are, and that's literally it. We don't have to do anything else. It seems very simple, but we're in this culture of people who cannot respect difference, right? And
Right.
that's like so central to a lot of our issues. So, uh, yeah,
Yeah, and I can say that's one thing in working with DHCD that's kind of, opened my field of knowledge in working with some transgendered youth or, youth identifying as asexual, pansexual, these different things. And they were teaching me because, and especially now, what pronouns do you use? Getting them in that position where they can advocate for themselves. But then again, still, it's at what point do they have this comfortability with their own bodies, with their attraction, and knowing what their sexuality is, and being able to verbalize to someone, this is what I like, and this is what I need to be comfortable.
yep, yep. So let's also talk about how body, and I know body positivity is your jam, one of
Oh,
your.
yes, honey.
So let's talk about body positivity and how it merges with sex positivity.
When I think of the two going together, first thing I think of is confidence.
Hmm.
I can say growing up, I did have a lot of confidence issues and self-esteem. So even like when I thought I was ready to start having sex, I still wasn't confident. So, I was having sex with shirts on, like, like I need to take this off. Like, oh, I didn't know that, like I wasn't there. So it's like, is that still comfortable? Are you still comfortable if you're still hiding parts of yourself? Because, in my mind, like we said, sex was this big, sacred thing, and virginity is supposed to be special, but that's not really what's happening. So I feel like even with body positivity now, it's a big thing where, you know, big butts, big breasts, small waist, all these things are, being implemented to what they feel like is a sexy body or something that's good to look at. But I feel like as long as you find yourself attractive, regardless of what imperfections you feel that you may have, that's going to make you feel more comfortable being sexual.
Yep. Yep.
Because if you're not confident in yourself and you're closing yourself off, you're like, no, make sure the lights are on. I'm keeping this t-shirt on, or, keeping my socks on or something. Like, you're not really engaging healthily in sex. So I am really big on body positivity, because I know that sometimes that can even be effective for some people in making healthy sexual decisions.
Hmm. Hmm.
What are you having sex for? Are you having sex for yourself, or are you having sex for this other person if you're not confident?
Hmm.
So I feel like those two tie into each other. And we have to get to a point where we stop, separating ourselves, like, skinny women over here, thick women over here, or, I see so many times on social media, what type of butt do you have, or what type of body do you have? And it's just like, what do it matter?
Right. Right.
Somebody like it, whatever you got, somebody like it, you know?
Again, that goes back to understanding, and maybe we just don't do a good job with how we're teaching, but we are literally all different in all
Hmm.
aspects, mentally, physically, sexually, all different, and that needs to be respected. I don't know why there is this push for everyone to look the same, especially, and I think Instagram
Yes.
is this Instagram culture is also affecting that a little bit too.
Oh, girl.
Like, do you want your body to look like this? And no, that works for that person, but no, I want my body to look like this. I'm okay with my
Right.
body looking like this.
And that's
So
nothing against anybody who, wants to take plastic surgery, whatever makes you feel good about yourself, do it.
exactly, exactly. but understand that is your choice, and that's
Exactly.
you, and what works for someone else may work for someone else. So how, if someone's watching or if someone asked you, how do I work on being more body positive, how did you get to this point where you're comfortable with not keeping the shirt on or embracing who you are? What advice would you give someone who is struggling to with their self-image?
I'm gonna be real frank when I say this and just straight to the point. Get naked. Be naked. Like, like I started what I started doing to get myself more comfortable in my body and where it's at now, because I used to be real big on, if I lose weight, I'll be beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That was the biggest thing growing up, because you always got that, you're pretty for a big girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just like, I'm sorry? Like, I'm pretty for a big girl. So it's like, in my mind, that sentence always stuck with me. And it was told like, well, if I lose weight, I'll be even better. And like, I'll draw more attention from men.
Yeah.
But then I started realizing like, some dudes like fat girls too. So, but the thing is, so listen, so I had to get myself to a point where I'm like, even if I do want to make changes to myself, I need to learn to be okay with where I'm at now. So I started appreciating my temple. If I was getting out the shower, I wasn't immediately grabbing a towel to cover myself up. I'd look at myself and be like, you know what, girl? You look good.
Exactly.
And I think that's a big thing too. Affirm yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Every morning you have to look in the mirror at some point. Yeah. Look in the mirror and start pointing out things that you like about yourself. Don't wait for somebody else to validate you. Don't wait to get those compliments from somebody else. If you want to, get real dolled up for yourself, do it. Take some selfies and be like, you know what? I look good. And I feel like that's what really starts building a platform. You're doing it for yourself. So I tell y'all, do that. Even being that we're having a conversation about sex, buy lingerie and wear it for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because you wear it for anybody else, they're going to enjoy it for about 2-3 minutes before it's off. Yeah. So, so wear it for yourself.
Yeah.
Friday night, you in the house by yourself, put it on and prance around. Put some music on. Ain't that gonna make you feel good? And just all the time, I always say, y'all, love on yourselves. Yeah. Love on yourselves. We all have imperfections. Love those imperfections, because that's what makes you you. But if there's anything you want to change, you can change it and still be you.
Yep. Yes. And Courtney in the chat said yes to the self-love. And self-love is...
Oh, hey, Courtney girl. Yes.
This whole conversation, body positivity, sex positivity, loving yourself where you are and accepting,
yes,
validating yourself, whether it's a sexual experience, whether it's your body image, whatever it is, right? Because if you don't love it, it's more about what you love than what someone else loves. If they love it, that's
yes.
Cool. But what's most important is how you feel about it. And again, that applies to not only your sexual experiences, but your body as well.
Exactly. You have to be comfortable with your body.
Yes, you do.
Be able to navigate it on your own and say, like, I think even just, it makes me think back to even as a younger child. I know I didn't realize this as a child, but like growing up and learning, like, what's a no space or a yes space, because are we even teaching, children where it's okay to be touched? Like you said, tell somebody, oh, go give that person a hug. If the child says no, and so like, no, be nice, go give them a hug. And it's like allowing them to have that consent where it's like, what, I don't feel comfortable giving that person a hug, and letting them be okay with that.
Yep. But it's so funny because I didn't really grasp that until, like I said, when I started following the Sex Positive Families page.
Right.
Because in my family, if an adult asks you to do something, whether it's to speak to a stranger, whether it's to come and give grandma a hug, if they ask you to do something, you're expected to comply, right?
Right.
You don't get to make the choice for yourself. It's what this adult said that goes. And
right.
So again, what are you teaching about consent? You're teaching that if an authority figure says to do something, then you need to comply. So when they get into, spaces like a work environment, and let's talk about, this relates to sexual harassment. When you have quid pro quo, when you have
yes.
a superior who asks you to do something for a sexual favor to get something else for it. That's the same thing. You got to do it because I'm your boss and you're going to get this out of it. But that's all connected. And so that's literally, essentially what we're saying with sex positivity is that when we are not, we're creating these other issues, right? If you look at so many things that's happening with Black women, whether it's sexual assault, any type of gender-based violence,
Yes.
You teach people to be more sex positive and to respect people where they are and to have consensual relationships, you start to peel back some of these other issues. I truly 100% believe that. But when you teach people that women's bodies are for, or you teach male identified people that women's bodies are for their consumption, they're going to
Yep.
do whatever for it, right? They hold the power. So all of it is about exerting power over another person, and they hold it. You know, socially and historically, women do not have that power that they do. So this is all connected, and it all just
Right.
makes me think too, you know, it was in terms of something you said. Let me think back to what it was. Now I'm losing it. I
Wait.
lost
I'm
it.
trying to think back. Like, I know we've been talking a lot, but I'm trying to think back to what I said.
Hmm. Oh, that's what it was. When you were talking about body positivity and how we think of, um, it made me think also when we said in the beginning that religion is a central part to us having a sex negative culture.
Right.
The way we think of bodies that are not thin, um, historically that has been like a European idea, right?
Yep.
Fat black bodies were negative.
Yep.
Being fat generally was a black thing.
Negative.
You were lazy. You know, those are all tropes that are European influenced. And so when we think about religion and European influence on religion as well, I think both. So now we're looking at white supremacy
Yep.
and how that is showing up in this conversation, not only in how we think about sex, but our bodies as well. But two things we are talking about, it's a white supremacist world, and then we're sex negative, and that's all these things are just tied together. So
Tying together. Exactly. And that's the thing. It's like, I feel as women, we have to establish that control because it is our body,
yeah.
and we are allowed to dictate what happens and does not happen to that body.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like sometimes when that choice is, I don't say taken away, but if that choice is not there, then there is no sex positivity.
Mm-hmm.
And then it leads like a negative idea of what sex is. And that's once again why sometimes such a hush topic.
Yep. Yep. And that brings me to, I know we talked a little bit about, or you and I discussed about um, how sex negativity leads to gender-based violence. So let's talk about someone who has experienced sexual trauma
Mm-hmm.
and they're working on becoming more sex positive, or they're working on being open again to sex. What would you say about that for someone who is looking to be more sex positive after that type of experience?
Okay, I would say as someone who was a survivor of sexual trauma, that initially what you should start off by doing is trying to establish that control again. Because in a sense, you didn't have control in the moment and you felt powerless. So now it's like, is this body really mine? Do I have a say what happens to this body? Because in that moment, I didn't have a say. And if I tried to have a say, my voice was taken. So all in all, I say get your voice back. If you ever do get to a point where now you do want to navigate sexual relationships again, project your voice and use your voice.
Mm-hmm.
Let them know this is what's going on, this is what's not going on. And that's why I also say establish those boundaries. You know, I feel like growing up, that trauma, along with other traumas, led me to not having any boundaries. And I became very codependent and people pleasing. And I thought that my body was something to be used to please someone or to get someone to reciprocate the love that I had.
Yeah.
Not at all, ladies. Establish those boundaries. You know, use your voice. Let it be known that this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And regardless of what that other person says, like, well, I like for someone who does this. It just ain't me then, boo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, it just ain't me. And you know, and if
Yeah.
you're ever getting serious with someone, and let them know, I've been through a trauma. You ain't gotta go into detail, you know, let them know the nitty gritty. Just let them know I've been through a trauma and this is what I feel comfortable with. And if they're not down with that, cut it. Don't waste any time. But I will say that also leads back into the body positivity. You know, some people who experience sexual trauma look at their body now as something disgusting, or, oh, I'm not comfortable in it. You got to get comfortable in your own skin again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so which goes back to loving on yourself, you know, affirming yourself. I am not that trauma. I'm not my traumas. I'm not that experience.
Yeah.
And make sure you keep pushing forward.
And that's also a good place. I think what you were just describing in terms of the conversation you have with the sexual partner could be applied to everyone. Have
Hmm.
open conversations about what the
Yes.
encounter is going to look like, what you want out of it, right? That's a part of sex positivity, being able to have that conversation honestly, openly, and safely with your sexual partner before the encounter. But also, what you were just saying in terms of, you know, I guess, being more positive or being more open after experiencing trauma. That's a good point to also just let everyone know that there are therapists out there, and there are some therapists who are specifically sex therapists. So even if you haven't
Yes.
experienced sexual trauma and you just want to talk to someone about, your sexual experiences, there's definitely someone out there, and we can always connect you. Um, I'll make sure that there's a follow-up email sent to all the participants. And those who are watching on Facebook, our email is on the Facebook page. But if you ever need to be connected to any type of resource, whether it's a therapist, whether it's where you can find this sort of information,
Right.
you want to be connected to other groups, like I mentioned, the Sex Positive Families, you can always shoot us an email or a message on any of our social media pages, and we'll do our best to connect you to whatever it is that you need. Um, but yeah, I love that, the conversation and setting boundaries and things.
Yeah.
That's really
And I
important.
think that's what some people too are scared of having those conversations. I don't want to call it a hard conversation, but for some people it might be a hard conversation. But I think having that conversation will truly make an experience that much better for each person, long as they both communicate what's yay or nays. Because a
Mhm.
lot of times, I don't think that conversation has happened. We're just diving in and kind of feeling our way around as we go,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and that makes it now awkward. You're gonna do something now. It's like, oh, that's a no, and it's like, oh,
But
then
think,
where do I go from here now? Like,
but if you think about it, it is going to be awkward when you're not used to having those conversations, right? So
exactly.
growing up, sex is this weird topic to have. And again, I told you, everything reminds me of us being in our teenage bodies. Like some
Yes,
people laugh when you mention sex, like it's, we're not.
they get this nervous giggle, like, like what
I know,
sex? Like,
but it goes back to that when we were not offered these sorts of spaces to have these sorts of conversations, or there weren't conversations that we were having in our families. Then as
right,
we're older, it is going to still be a very awkward conversation to have. But I hope that this conversation that we're having can start to, I guess, promote more spaces where people are open. And if parents are watching, as I said, to start to think about how you have had or are having the conversation with your child. Because as
right,
you think like, oh, they're not ready for it, children are exposed to something sex related since birth, very early.
very
I
early.
think it's earlier than what most parents think. They think, oh, I shouldn't have the conversation until they get in high school. No, I think you should have it much earlier than that.
No, most definitely. And that's what even leads me into, even though I'm not a parent, sometimes I also think to myself, like, you know, with what I know now, what would I tell my younger self? And
Mm-hmm.
any information that my younger self didn't know or would like to have known, that's some information that I would probably want to share with my children for when
Yeah.
I do have them.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes some kids are just out here navigating with the wind, just going with the flow because they don't know, or they don't know who to ask or who to speak to about those type of things. But I think once the conversation happens at home at a very young age, it makes it that much easier for them to engage in these experiences and know when they're presented with it, how to approach them, how to respond.
Yep. Yep. And that's very good. That's a good point, because if I think back on what I would have told myself, I think I would have told myself that, again, sex is a good thing. It's
Yeah.
not something that should be used against you. But that's what we do, right? It's either it's a sin, or now you're tainted, or oh, I got that from her. So
Hmm.
and I think honestly, Shayna, that is what bothered me the most with the idea of sex. It was guys being, and I had brothers, right? So I was around my brothers,
Okay.
their friends, and I heard the way they talked about women, and I did
Yep.
not want to be that person. They made it sound so bad and negative and nasty, and I did not want to be that person. I did
Yeah.
not want to be up for discussion or for people to be sitting around having this conversation like, oh yeah, I smashed that, right? Because that's how they talk. But
They
again,
gossip just like girls do.
that, but that's how they spoke about women, and I did not want to be that. So looking now, if I had looked back, I wish that someone had told me they're immature, right?
Hmm.
A mature person is not going to think about sex as if they took something from you. A mature
Right.
person is going to think about sex as if you all created something together and it was a pleasurable moment.
And you enjoyed it. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And that's what it would have been for me. It's something that can be enjoyed. It's not something that is taking something from you or you're losing, part of yourself. Because
Right.
again, that when you say, oh, she lost her virginity or I took this, it's objectifying women again. It's making them be sexual objects. And when I hear the conversation now, it makes me think of like a used car dealership, right?
Right.
And you hear, hold on, don't somebody said that in a lyric in a song. I don't know who it is. I can't think of what it is, but we speak of a person's vagina as if it can have mileage, right?
Yes.
It has mileage. Once one person has this vehicle, then it becomes a used vehicle, and the
Mm-hmm.
work goes down or the value goes down, and so now you don't want it. Who's gonna want a used vehicle over a brand new vehicle? That's how they think.
Exactly.
And that is what I mean about being immature. A human body is not a vehicle, right?
Exactly.
First and foremost, let's start there. It is not a vehicle. And so why are we doing that? But
When I tell you, I've heard that phrase before, like, oh, she got some miles on her. What does that
yes,
mean?
like, and it doesn't make sense. Like when I think about, and again, it goes back to when we think about how we get to this point of being sex negative. It starts with
Hmm.
messaging that we send, the language we use, and how we speak of sex, and things like that. Like, oh, she has mileage or whatever. Like, just ugh.
Yes, I forgot what interview. I remember, I think her Instagram is like, this is how I look. But I remember she was doing an interview and she was like talking about that, like, when guys mention like, oh, I got her, or like, I
Mhm,
smashed her,
mhm.
or be considered another notch on someone's belt. I appreciated her confidence because she responded back to them like, okay, well, she was like, I slept with them too. I smashed them too.
Exactly.
Like, so like he's a
Exactly.
notch on my belt now. Like,
Exactly. But when you have this culture that has women as subordinate, she doesn't get the opportunity to smash anybody.
right.
For them, it wasn't even for her. So that's the thing, right? Women aren't even afforded the opportunity to be pleasured. It's somebody else's. That's it. It wasn't your opportunity.
Exactly.
You just happened to be there. But that is a very good response. And as I said, my younger self, that's why I avoided it, because
Yep.
how they made it sound. And I didn't want to be connected to people who spoke like that, who
Yeah.
speaking about me as if I was just this body that they had one time and then that's it. You know,
Hmm.
but again, now as an older adult, girl,
Yeah, like, I mean, and unfortunately, it's sad to say that, there's conversations like that still going on, like, oh, I hit that or anything. But now it's just like, now that I'm older, I would look back and say, so,
right,
like,
right.
like,
But we still do it. They love
I could give commentary on whether it was good or not, you
yeah,
know? But then
yeah.
it's like, I think also women, along with the confidence in sex and being sex positive, is understanding that, your orgasm matters too.
Mhm.
And that's the thing, like you said, like, we were, labeled as, we're just here for this one thing. We're not allowed to enjoy sex.
Yep.
I think that's what also maybe led to like a sex negative, why sex is so taboo and hushed amongst women, like, oh, we're not supposed to enjoy this.
Yep.
And it's like, yes, you are. So I think once you be comfortable in knowing that you're allowed that orgasm, you're entitled, you deserve that orgasm when you're engaging with someone in a sexual intercourse, then it makes it much more sex positive. And
Yeah.
all that, labeling and stuff like that,
Yeah.
that goes out the window. Because at the end of the day, did you enjoy it? Like, and that's up for debate. And so unless some guys or any other gender wants it out there, like, no, I did not enjoy it, and now that rumor is spreading around, I
Mhm.
think those conversations need to be weeded out about like, oh yeah, she's a notch on my belt. Be treated like it's a trophy,
Yeah.
like you won something.
Yeah.
I think that's what even makes it negative. Like you said, growing up, a thing like, I didn't want nobody whispering about me like that.
Exactly. And that's what kept me from it. So
Mm-hmm.
if there were sex positive spaces and programs that shifted, even though I was hearing those sorts of messages, if there was something else that let me know that it is okay to enjoy it, right?
Right.
And even if that's how this childish teenager's mind is, that they took something from you, the central point is that it is possible for you to enjoy this, right? This experience.
Right.
So that is all the questions that I have, but I wanted to ask you, is there I guess, anything else that you think people should know, or like a summary, or what's something that you would want to leave people with?
All in all, I think I would want to leave our viewers and anybody else watching just a note that it's really important to love on yourself and be positive about anything that you want to put your heart or mind to. Sex is not a bad thing. It's actually a very good and very healthy thing. And a lot of times, even there are grown women out there who are not sure about how to engage in sex healthily. So don't feel scared to ask questions. Hell, I'm 32 still asking questions like, well, how, do I get to this point? How do I get to that point? I would say just find, like you refer to, sex therapists, or, healthy open sex spaces where they talk about sex and these things, because it's not a taboo thing. We can engage in sex healthily. Even if you are into kink, that's not a bad thing.
Yes.
So I say, be proud.
Yep.
Don't be ashamed. And that's one thing with this whole thing we named it, peeling back shame. Don't be ashamed.
Exactly.
Because it's nothing wrong about any of this.
Exactly. And I think for me, I would just say again to remember that being sex positive is to literally give people the space to explore and to learn, right? And if you're looking at this and you say, well, how do I want to be more sex positive? Try to have an open mind, right? When you're presenting something that's new to you, try to think, is this what I think real, or is this something I've been conditioned to believe, right? Because when we continue to create this culture of sex and negativity, and we are thinking specifically about the Black community, when we use negative messaging like what we've discussed today, we're stripping Black children, Black girls specifically, of healthy sexual development, right? And when we do that, that creates a larger culture of risky behaviors, of gender-based violence, of negative body image. All the things that we discussed today honestly could be branched. They're like branches of this whole conversation. So again, just being open-minded and respecting people's sexual experiences, and like I said, hopefully we can have a conversation about how religion fits into this, and maybe we could bring some people who are in the religious community in to talk about how we can have this conversation that is still respectful of your religion. I don't want it to be a space where we're like beating down, religious groups, because that's not
right.
We're not going to get anywhere like that. If we could, come together and we can think of ways that we can have this conversation that is still respectful of people's religions, in a way that still gives space for the exploration that we're talking about, then that's what we want. So,
indeed,
I wanted to take a few minutes to see if anyone had questions. I'll check Facebook to see if anybody has been asking questions there. But if anyone has questions, you can drop them in the chat. And we'll just
please.
Minutes to see.
I say we will let you in on what we know or what we don't. I say because we all still learning out here.
All right, so I'm looking at Facebook, and Jamie, hey Jamie, so she's my friend from Towson. But hey y'all, I think that too, men place these labels on us, and we women adopted those labels and use them to degrade each other. Women were conditioned by religion and men to have shame and the negative connotations attached to sex. And I think that is very
girl.
That is a very good point. How we internalize these negative messaging. And when people mention that, I tell them that when you think about a lot of times when we say that Black people can be anti-Black, right? Like they
Mm,
internalize those messages from white people. It's the
yes,
same thing when you're applying it to gender. That just because it's a woman does not mean that a woman cannot also be a part of degrading another woman. She totally could.
very much so.
So that's a good point, Jamie.
That was a huge insult back in the day, like, oh, you hoe and things like that. But now it's like, as I've grown older, now I look back at that and say, was that girl really a hoe or just a sexually positive
Mm-hmm.
woman? Or
Mm-hmm.
someone who was, in her sexuality, knew what she liked and was getting it.
Yeah. And to be honest, I think we all have done that.
Oh yeah.
And and I think that when I look back now, I think it honestly comes a little bit from being threatened, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like you gotta call that person a hoe to remind them that they're not better than you because
Exactly.
you're better than them because
you're classy. You don't do that, like.
And that is what that is. And the older that I get, I think about it. I'm like, you're not confident if you got to call somebody else a hoe. You can't be, because why are you concerned about what their sexual experiences are? And again, if you are if you're better than them because you don't have sex, I think we need to really think about that. I think about that a lot recently, that I really think it's the person being threatened.
And right. And why is it even acknowledged as being loose? Because you have sex with different individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, we definitely have to stop calling each other hoes. I'm not sure. I might have been called a hoe even in my time. That's why I call me a hoe right now. Like, you know what? Might be right. Like, well, because we embrace it. Why?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have sex. Yes. So what? Like, I think that's even the attitude back then. Like, the girls who were name called like that. It was just like, okay. And
mm-hmm. And
so
back, I have so much respect for them, right?
Yes, because I wasn't confident like that.
Yes, for being called these names and you owned it, right? Like, who cares?
Child.
If that's what you think about me, then that's what you think about me. But I think that that's a lesson that a lot of us could learn from those people who, whatever,
And that's the thing. I think, and that's also like, going along with, just being positive about yourself. Like, I was always taught you are not the names that you are called. You're only what you answer to. And, growing up, it's like, oh, the best thing they could call you fat B or anything like that. You're right. And what else? So it's like, that's why now I have the utmost respect for them, because they took that in stride. And it was such like a horrible thing to be called a hoe.
Yep. Oh well. But so I don't see any other questions on Facebook, but
I see a question here from Miss Tina Moore. Okay. Opinion on, as parents, feeling on whose responsibility it is to speak to their children about sex, whether the child is male or female.
About whether it's
like which parent should speak to.
I want to talk about this for a second, because
that was a good one.
This goes back to the last point that I made when I said sometimes when you think about something, you have to ask, is it real, or if it's what you've been conditioned to believe?
Right.
A lot of times for me, I have a hard time with male identified people or dad presenting people having like sexual conversation with girls. But then I realized that that's trauma talking, right? That's trauma talking, because I don't trust. It's like in the back of my mind, I'm not trusting that man to have this open or being able to have the same conversation as a mom would, but that's not true. Right. I think that regardless of who the parent is, because you do have some family situations where there are two dads, right? Or there are two moms. And so there really is no choice about which one should be having the conversation.
Or single parent households.
Yes. I think that all parents could be equipped with the knowledge and tools to be able to have healthy conversations about sex. And that goes back to that one group that I was talking about, sex positive families. I cannot stress enough how good it is and how good the resources are for parents who need guidance with that. But I think that, I don't know that it's anyone's role specifically. I think that any parent could be trained to have the conversation.
And I would also even leave it up to the child. Ask them, who are you most comfortable having this conversation with? because, you know, there's, even though there, you know, there might be a son in it, the son might feel more comfortable talking to mom about sex, you know, or the daughter might feel more comfortable talking to dad about sex. There really is no assigned role. But I think leaving them that choice to where they can talk to either one, or they might even say, I'd like to talk to both of you.
Yeah.
But I would say don't do it in a sense where it's like an intervention. You're like, oh my God, you know, like you both are coming at me about this. So, you know, I just ask a question, you know, like, what do you know about sex? They might look at you like, oh my God. And in that moment, you feel comfortable talking to me about this right now or not yet? Or would you rather talk to the other parent?
Yeah.
And let them voice that, like, you know what, I'm not ready yet. Or if they are ready, yeah, I'm comfortable talking to you. Or you know what, I'd rather talk to such and such. Don't take it personal. It just might be, you know, a comfortability thing. But yeah, I don't think there's really any assigned role either. You know, I mean, I know growing up at first, like you said, I had like a fear talking to my dad about sex. I was always his baby girl. So the last thing I wanted him to look at me was like,
Yeah.
you know, like she's having
Right.
sex. Like what? You know,
But that's what I'm saying. But we even have to do better with teaching men to be able to have healthy sex conversations, because then that would also help them to be able to have this conversation with their daughter or with, you know, however their children present. I think it would allow them to feel comfortable having the
oh
conversation.
yeah,
A lot of times they're uncomfortable with having the conversation. It's not that they won't. It's just, how do I approach this conversation?
exactly. And I think that's also important. I think like when I think back of it, I sometimes think I, you know, took that experience away from my dad where we didn't have that conversation. I mean, we have them now. I think even now sometimes he's like, what did you just say? You know, but I think, you know, we definitely have to open that up and having those conversations to where it's no awkwardness on either end. No, but I think like you said, long as the parents are receiving that education on how best to sit with their child and talk to them, it makes it a better lane for the child to even ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. That
So
was
look up that YouTube, y'all. I know I am.
that was a very good question.
Yes, that was very good. Cause you know, you don't think about that. You immediately think like, you know, mom and daughter have the conversation, or, you know, father and son have that conversation. But what if it's, like you said, a single parent household, you know, father presenting parent with two daughters?
Yep. And honestly, I love, and I think maybe this again could be from my own experience of not having that type of relationship with my dad to have that conversation. But
Right.
I love when children, especially girl identified children, have that relationship with their dad to be able to have those conversations, like how you said, you know, sometimes you'll say something to your dad. I love that. And I think that's the child in me wanting to have had that
Right.
with my dad, right? So I love that, because when not only does that again help dad and the child to feel comfortable, but also if we're talking about girls growing up and feeling comfortable around men,
Exactly.
conversations with men on topics like this. So that's a really good. I like that question a lot.
Yes, that was a good one. Oh, we have another one. Oh no, it's the same one.
I have one on Facebook.
Okay.
How can men that aren't attracted to women help change the culture surrounding heterosexual slash male attracted women's experiences? So how can, I guess the question is, how can non-heterosexual men help change this culture that women are experiencing? For me, it's always going to come down to support and having
Yes.
a conversation with yourself. So supporting the efforts, you know, things like this, when women are having these conversations, they're letting you know what some of the issues are. Supporting,
Right.
listening to what they're saying their experiences are, validating those experiences, and then having the conversations. Because even if you are not a heterosexual man, sometimes there's still some privilege. There's still some male privilege there that you can use, you can use at your disposal. Not all the time, but sometimes there's still a little bit of male privilege attached. So they might take it better from you than us. And you can have people advocating for the same thing. So
I was gonna say, you know, hold your heterosexual male friends accountable. You know, because like you said, with the male privilege, it might be like, you know, oh, you're getting down like that, and kind of just like not having a conversation of what you feel is morally right or wrong. So hold them accountable. And like you said, validate and support.
Yep.
That's mostly important. We got another question. The world that we live in is changing and children are learning sex at a younger age. When do you think is the best time to speak to your child before they learn it from someone else?
I'm not an expert on sex education, but from watching some of, I don't want to say her name because I don't want to get it wrong, but she's the founder of the group that I'm talking about. I think she talked about, I don't want to say waiting, but I think sometimes kids are very curious and they have questions such as like, where do babies come from? And that's
Right.
a good opportunity to introduce the conversation. But
Right.
I don't feel comfortable giving like an age recommendation simply because I'm not an expert on that. And I do not mind saying I'm not an expert on that.
Right. I will say also I'm not an expert, but I feel like they'll let you know when the questions come. I think the best time is when they start asking those questions is to have the conversation. Because if you turn them away, like say they ask that question ask a certain question 6 or 7, and you're like, oh, we'll talk about that or another time.
Yep.
Whenever they start asking those questions or having the curiosity about like, where do babies come from? Or, I have this, mommy or daddy, I have this. What do you have? They start asking those questions at young ages.
Yep.
At what age range? Not positively sure, but I would say when those questions start coming, don't derail from them. That's when it's time to have the conversation.
Yep. 100%. Let me just make sure.
Yes. See.
This was a really good conversation, y'all. Thank you for the questions. They were good.
Yes, they are definitely very helpful.
But if we don't have any others here.
Yeah, I just checked the chat. There's nothing in the chat. And the Q&A, that was where I found those two questions.
Okay.
Yeah, but also going back to the chat, I see Jasmine said, absolutely, teaching your child that they have a choice is extremely important. And I think that definitely goes back into what we were just saying, like let the child have the choice when they're ready to have those conversations. I think the more power we allow our children to have, the more easier it'll be for them to navigate these different spaces that they'll experience in life. I know sometimes parents look at like, give my child power control, whoa. Yeah. But in these type of spaces, it's mostly important because if they don't have a choice, that's how they're going to be conditioned to start growing up, is that they don't. It's important to let them know that they do. Yep. In certain aspects. Before they're like, you have to teach my kid to do this.
We're not saying give them full control, let them just run around all crazy.
Yeah, not in that aspect, not at all.
Setting them up to be healthy sexual beings is
yes,
what it comes down to. And again, thinking about how this impacts our work. Again, so Oceans Garden focuses mainly on all types of violence against Black women, but
right,
like this conversation of sex positivity can tie into our work and starting to undo some of the negative messaging and things that create these larger issues. So I will post on our Facebook page a link to Sex Positive Families so that everyone can go and see their work. And as I said, if anyone ever needs to be connected to resources, you can always just shoot us a message or an email.
Yes.
And Jasmine said, especially when it comes to whether they want to give family members hugs, it shouldn't be forced. It creates unhealthy boundaries. Yes, and that
yes.
And I never thought about that until recently. I really didn't.
Neither.
But that is what we're making them think, that they don't get a choice whether or not they want to hug someone, or it's. But that is how you can start with the conversation on consent, and that is why I say it's never too early for that, because at very young ages, we're asking them like, hey, or we're taking their pictures, right? It's right. Asking, hey, can I take your picture, or can I have a hug? And I think a lot of times we do, even when we're being playful with kids, we might say, can I have a hug? But starting those practices can help with consent conversations before, they're at a point where they're even thinking about having sex or anything, but it's
Mm-hmm.
practice to start.
It's very important.
Great.
Oh, we're getting some more. Okay. Thank you for opening this event to the public. Such a great experience to be a part of. Oh, thank you, Tiffany. Thank you for joining us. With the world evolving and changing every day, although not an expert, definitely need to be prepared to answer questions about sex due to all the commercials lately on TV. For example, use Viagra.
Yeah.
Yes. And no, I think, and that's definitely too a lot of different avenues where they're being exposed, like TV, social media, the regular world, and things like that. And the thing is, like, you can't. I'm, like I said, not a parent, not an expert either, but I feel like you really can't shield them from everything. So at some point, the conversation is going to be had about the differences of people in the world. So have that conversation and have the conversation with them, like, this is what you're going to experience, and you have a choice of whether or not you're open to it. And I think that's just like so important. Like you said, I still think about to this day, never thinking of like, making a child go give someone a hug and things like that.
Yep.
How that affects boundaries.
We don't even think about until we look back and like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And even when I was looking at Tina's comment about the Viagra commercials, it made me think that we're also in this age where children have access to technology everywhere, right?
Yes.
So you wonder if they're even getting on Google to ask questions about what things are, or even if they're Googling how to do an act or something, right? I wonder what they're on the internet to look for. So that's also something else to think about.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like how much, because we think about textbooks in school, they're not letting us know that about that. Like when you look at health and everything, like you're learning about this and all that, but you're not really learning about what sex is, how it's done, or anything like that.
Yep. And Sharon said, this has been a great conversation, ladies. So glad I was able to listen. And thank you so much for joining. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Like this was great. Like I was so nervous at first. I'm like, I don't public speak. I'm a blogger. I type, but like you said, this is like a conversation amongst homegirls. We were just going back and forth. But I think definitely having more conversations like this, and even like you said, leading into the next whole webinar with religion and things like that. When we open the spaces, it makes people more comfortable to discuss these things and get some knowledge.
Exactly. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the Facebook stream.
Okay.
And so it's just us that are on the Zoom right now. Again, thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you.
If you want to stay in the loop about other webinars and things that we'll be having, you can always follow us on Facebook. It's Oceans Garden, or on Instagram, Oceans Garden MD, or our website, oceansgarden.org. So whichever way. Shayna, they get connected with your work.
So to get connected with my work, I am on Instagram, and it is more or less. More has 2 O's, like my last name. It is more or less _of Shay. So I'm on Instagram, and my link to my blog is on that site. I'm still working on a Facebook, so bear with me. I'm a baby, baby blogger. So we're working on it. But yeah, if you find me on Instagram, page is open. Pop in, ask questions, give me ideas. What you'd like me to discuss on my blog? Anything. I'm open to it all.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
We're on. This is a completely transparent moment, but when Vanessa wasn't able to join us, we were thinking like, or at least I was, how can we reframe this conversation,
right,
in a way that just flows, right? Because we don't want it to feel like a piece is missing. She brings the sex education piece, but being able to, still tailor this conversation to make it make sense. And I think it went really well, and I think
it went really well too.
We had some feedback, so I'm gonna go ahead and end it. I will be posting the sex positive families momentarily, and this conversation will be up on our YouTube. The live stream is going to be up on Facebook, but it'll be on our YouTube as well if anyone just wants to refer back to it. So
yes,
Shayna, thank you everybody who registered.
No problem.
And I'll see y'all next time.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.